Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, just weeks into a new administration, and all hopes and promise of bipartisanship have been rejected. The Biden administration and my Democrat colleagues in the Senate lasted 10 days before they ditched any attempt at real compromise. Now, instead of working together to provide targeted relief to those that are hurting from the coronavirus pandemic, Democrats are moving forward with a reconciliation process to pass a nearly $2 trillion spending bill. Reconciliation is a process that was created to make quick changes related to budget and spending that were assumed to get bipartisan support. It was never meant to be a tool to pass major legislation. But Democrats know they can't pass their harmful policies through legislation, so they're looking for any tool they can find to ram them through the process. Senators Schumer and Sanders keep pushing forward without Republican support to get the change they need, no matter what. No matter that the spending package includes a number of liberal policies that have nothing to do with the coronavirus. No matter that this spending package has a bailout of wasteful liberal states for their decades of mismanagement. Even as the latest data shows that states across the country are reporting positive income growth. No matter that the $2 trillion would throw our nation even deeper into unsustainable debt, hurting American families. We need to be very clear about this. America is in a debt crisis, and we need to start talking about it and taking decisive action to reverse course. In 2020 alone, the federal government increased its debt by more than $4 trillion. Today, it sits at a massive and unsustainable $27 trillion. That's why every time I'm faced with the question of spending taxpayer dollars, I ask myself some simple yet important questions. What is the plan to pay for it? What is the return on investment for American families? Does the proposal include measures to prevent waste and fraud and ensure accountability? Asking these questions isn't a novel idea. It's the same process I went through every day when I was governor of Florida. And it's what most Americans go through when making financial decisions at home or for their businesses. No family would needlessly spend money without a plan, and no business can afford to not get a return on their investments. Spending without consequence isn't how things work in the real world, and it's not how things should work in government. Congress's decades of failure to think and act responsibly has led to enormous deficits, insurmountable debt, and out-of-control spending. But instead of getting serious about this debt and its inevitable consequences, the Democrats are focused on more government, more spending, higher taxes, and no accountability. Biden's nominees are no different. In 2018, Janet Yellen, Biden's new Treasury Secretary, was quoted speaking about the unsustainable U.S. debt and said, "If I had a magic wand, I would raise taxes." How's that good for an American family? Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the new Transportation Secretary, said he's open to raising the gas tax on American families. How's that good for an American family? And near tandem, tapped to run the Office of Budget and Management, has been a vocal supporter of the Green New Deal, a $93 trillion disaster that would devastate our economy and kill jobs. How's that good for an American family? These are the people who are going to get our economy on track and provide opportunities for American families? I don't think so. My concern about the future of our country cannot be understated. In August, Congress will have to deal with the expiration of the debt ceiling. This is a critically important issue, but for years, Congress has ignored it. The debt ceiling has been suspended for more than 2 years, allowing the federal government to spend out of control and rack up insane debt on the federal credit card. And we have to pay interest on this debt. Right now, interest rates are at historic lows, less than 1.5%, and we're still paying nearly $350 billion in interest on our debt each year. Think about it. We get no return on any of these dollars. Here's a chart. Look at this. This is the $345 billion we're going to spend in interest for 2020. Look at these programs: Medicare, 862, Medicaid, Defense, Social Security. Look at the deficit we're running, $3.3 trillion. If this interest rate goes up, and we're already running a big deficit, even before COVID, we're going to have a deficit this year over $1 trillion. What program does somebody anticipate cutting, and what tax tax do people believe we ought to increase? The $350 billion we're going to spend on interest, we get no return. There's no family that gets any benefit out of this interest expense unless you're sitting and holding treasuries. So it's insane, but it's not the scariest part. If interest rates increase to the 50-year average of 6.2%, that's the 50-year average, we'll be obligated to pay $1 trillion more in interest every year. So look at this. So if interest rates go to the 50-year average, we're going to go from a little less than $350 billion to over $1 trillion in interest expense. So if we have $1 trillion in interest expense, how are we going to fund all these programs when we're already running deficits? And that's if the debt stops growing. Every additional dollar in debt we hold increases the dollars in interest we owe. It's an awful cycle that has disastrous consequences for American families. That's why we cannot allow the debt ceiling to simply be suspended again. We cannot allow a radical liberal agenda to destroy Americans' chance to ever get out of this hole. As we recover from the pandemic, inflation will rise from its 2020 low of 1.4% to nearly 2.3% or more. That's a 60% increase in inflation. But if Congress continues to recklessly spend and do nothing about our growing debt, inflation will increase higher. There is a direct link between the federal government's unsustainable spending and the rising cost of goods and services. Here's what that means for American families. The price of everyday goods will rise. Gas prices will rise, and rental housing costs will increase. Increases in inflation hit American hourly workers and fixed income families the hardest. And these hits are exacerbated when liberal politicians like Pete Buttigieg get their way and raise the gas tax on other costs on families. So while politicians in Washington keep spending money like it's a game, American families suffer. Radical spending and reckless proposals directly hurt families. Every dollar we allocate is borrowed from taxpayers, and if Congress is irresponsible, it's the taxpayers that suffer. Adding insult to injury, a rise in the debt will also either cause or be accompanied by a rise in interest rates. That's bad for everyone. When interest rates increase, everything from car loans to student loans to mortgages becomes more expensive for the American people. And the interest on our debt, which is already the fourth largest expenditure in the federal budget, will become our largest expenditure. For every 1% increase in interest rate, we're going to spend another $2 trillion over 10 years. That's more taxpayer money getting no return. There's nothing, there's no services, there's no products, there's nothing for the American consumer. For people on fixed incomes, their incomes are going to stay the same while the prices for the items they buy will go up month after month. For hourly workers, wages will never go up fast enough to cover the ever-increasing cost of goods and services. I know all this sounds scary. That's because it is. Politicians in Washington are afraid to tell you the truth. So here it is. If you want a country to survive and thrive and continue to be a beacon for freedom, prosperity, and hope around the world, we'll need to make tough choices after this crisis is over. We'll need to do way more with less. We'll need to reassert the fundamental principle of conservatism that the private sector and individuals, not government, should be the driving forces behind our economic stability and success. We have to stand up for these values, and when Democrats try to spend $2 trillion on their priorities that have no bipartisan support, we have to say no. We have to make sure that every dollar is spent strategically on things that actually help struggling families and businesses. When Democrats want to raise taxes to pay for government's wastefulness, we have to say no. Short-term solutions aren't going to work anymore. We're in a battle for the future of our nation, and we cannot relent. As I stated after Congress passed the CARES Act, once this crisis is over, we must make a plan to cut federal spending by at least the amount we spent during this crisis. There is no other option. In August, Congress will once again confront the expiration of the debt ceiling. It's time to take action. It's time to wake up. We can fix this and put our nation on a fiscally responsible path. We fix this by doing what I did in Florida. We need to focus on growing the economy, cutting taxes and burdensome regulations, and streamlining permitting. We fix this by helping every American get a good job. And we fix this by getting a return on every taxpayer dollar we spend. I'm going to keep talking about this issue and proposing solutions because this is one of the most severe and most ignored crises facing our nation. It's not going away, and the harder the Democrats push their wasteful, harmful proposal, the harder I'm going to push back. This problem is only getting worse. As long as I'm a member of the U.S. Senate, I will fight to rein in the out-of-control spending that is putting our children and our grandchildren's future at risk. I'll be back on this floor again and again until something gets done. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.